Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call this Auditor General Committee meeting of Thursday, February 13th, 2025 to order. This committee meeting is being convened in person and by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw. As such, committee members may participate in person or by electronic means. And we do have a couple of members online. If any committee member loses connection during the voting process, we will have staff on hand to get you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The contact information has been circulated to you. If attending virtually, committee members are reminded to please enable their videos to ensure quorum, and this is also required during voting. This is subsequent to Section 1413 of the Procedure Bylaw. Members of the public can view the proceedings via the live stream as well as our YouTube link, which will be posted on X at Van City Clerk. Video of committee members speaking, presentations, amendments, and vote results will be projected to viewers when available. The external members of the committee can access the speaking queue by clicking the raise hand icon on WebEx, raising your hand, or using the Crest On panel. In case of an emergency where we need to evacuate the building, I would like to direct your attention to the exits. There are 2 exits beyond the glass doors to the left. If the glass doors are obstructed, please direct your attention to the 4 exits in this chamber. Please use the stairs, do not use the elevator. If you require accessibility assistance, please remain at your location and wait for a security team member to guide you to a safe location. I would also like to highlight that there is a defibrillator located at the end of the hallway outside of council chambers. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Thank you to our staff. Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Councillor Dominato in the chair, Councillor Kirby-Young, Vice Chair.
Present.
Councillor Klassen. Councillor Montague.
Present.
Councillor Joe is absent. Councillor Fry.
Present.
External Representative Archie G. Johnston is absent. External Representative Carol Bellringer. External Representative Sophia Sui is absent. You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you, clerks. So now review our plan for the day. Any comments on the agenda items can be sent to the committee using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be posted on X at Van City Clerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's long-standing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. Finally, I remind committee members that if an amendment is brought forward, it must be submitted to the clerk in writing in final written form before the committee member introduces it. Please ensure the clerk has received your amendment by emailing it to the amendment distribution list, and that has been circulated to you. Today, there are 3 items on the agenda. Our first item is additional information report on the December 24th follow-up meeting. Before we begin this agenda item, if anyone believes they have a conflict of interest, now is the time to declare it. Any conflict of interest disclosures? Seeing and hearing none, I'll now invite the Auditor General, Mike McDonnell, to introduce the item along with Lori Burnt, Deputy Auditor General. I also want to note that we have Jason Murray, Chair of the Finance and Risk Committee with the Vancouver Police Board present.
Thank you, Chair. I really don't have very much to say about this item. There's no presentation. At our meeting in December, I provided my semi-annual follow-up on the recommendations from previous audit reports. And within that was a rather brief response from the Vancouver Police Board in relation to recommendations associated with our audit of enterprise risk management. That was due to a personnel issue. There had been a turnover in a key position, and what you have before you is an updated response from the police board, and you have the chair of the Finance and Risk Committee here as well to answer any questions you might have. This is not part of our normal process, but I really found that this was a very positive, really respectful thing to do, and respectful of this committee and its mandate, and of council in general. So with that, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'll now move to see if we have questions from committee members. You have up to 5 minutes to ask questions, and if you do, please place yourself on the queue. And I do see Vice Chair Kirby-Young. I'll advance you. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, my question, I guess for the Auditor General first, and if Jason Murray wants to supplement, and I'd asked this last time, was confirmation if the VPD was actually bringing in outside expertise in the cybersecurity area, given the complexity of that area now, the significance of the risk and the impact. And I understood at the time that an individual who previously worked for VPD was being hired back to oversee that, but there was a plan to seek external expertise and consultation as opposed to in-housing it, for example, because it's such a specialized area. So I'm just looking for clarity on what happened and what services are being used.
Oh, thank you, but I think I would have to defer to the police board to speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll invite, I think Jason Murray's coming to the podium.
Thank you. If I just, before I approach the direct question, just to remind the committee that, or to update the committee, that what you have in front of you in writing is the written down commentary that I provided this committee in December. So there's truly nothing new to see here, but we thought it important to augment, actually it was Vice Chair Kirby-Young who had asked us to augment my verbal report with something written. In respect of that individual question, I do not right now have an answer that I can provide, but I can endeavor to find that answer out and report it back. And if I understand correctly, it's a question whether the department is looking to outside IT expertise in respect of cybersecurity.
Yes, that was my question that I asked quite explicitly and have several times now, and I'm still looking for some timeliness in an answer as opposed to just hiring back an internal individual. And I think you acknowledged quite fully, and appreciated hearing that answer, Mr. Murray, around the benefit of having outside expertise. So how and when are we going to get clarity around that?
Yeah, it's a question, Vice Chair, that I'll have to bring to the department and ask them to report back on. But in terms of from the board's perspective, that's something we'll defer to our department and reply back with information.
Okay, well, can we get a commitment to when we get that back? Because that's the same answer that we got the last time I asked it, I think, in the time before that. And I'm asking the same question again, and we still don't have an answer.
Well, I'll endeavor to return back with an answer at the next committee meeting.
Or it could be sent in writing to the committee as an option to it, because we don't meet very regularly. Is that a possibility?
If that's more convenient, happy to do that.
Yeah, and I'm going to interject because I appreciate the points that Vice Chair Kirby-Young is raising, and yes, we aren't meeting again for a number of months, and so it would be, without moving a motion per se, it would be appreciated to have a response back in March of 2025, which by the end of that month, and so, and I think Councillor Kirby-Young, would that be reasonable if we got something in writing at that time?
Yeah, I would appreciate it, and I would appreciate the follow through. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate you raising that question again. Any further questions, Councillor Kirby-Young or Vice Chair? Sorry.
No, I think my time's ticking. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to advance Carol Bellringer for questions. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question for the police board on recommendation 2, and I do confess I did not go back to see if it was available previously. But what I'm looking for, so this is in terms of requiring Chief Constable establish, maintain, obtain board feedback on and approval of an enterprise risk management framework, including a policy and risk register. And what I'm looking for is between October and December, it moved from partially implemented to fully implemented or substantially. And with the narrative, I'm wondering if you can give us the breakdown of what occurred between October and December to bring it to completion.
Thank you for the question. So between October and December, what's happened, well, previous to our December report, the board had approved ISO 31,000 as of the ERM standard. In the intervening months, and as described in the text underneath the recommendation, the board has approved the high-level ERM policy developed by the VPD. The department has also developed its internal risk register, which has been approved, and consistent with those recommendations that were made in the audit report. And so we are continuing, and the check mark will show fully or substantially committed. In our view, it's substantially implemented. We're still working with the department on developing and implementing the register at this point.
Thank you for that. Do you have further questions, Carol?
Well, I can understand how that in its entirety brings it together. I'm not seeing what happened between October and December, but maybe it's not necessary to know exactly when. It just, a lot of that was even prior to October.
Would it be helpful for the committee to have dates associated with the commentary in future updates?
Well, and yes, please, only because it's sort of, I just want to make sure that there's a substantial amount of work occurring and that it's not just, yeah, it's already there. I think the dates will help to determine that, so thank you.
I think, and thank you for that, Carol, and thank you, Jason. I think that's another great takeaway for future reports, and appreciate you also being here in person to answer some of those questions. Are there any further questions from committee members on this item? I'm seeing none, and I'm noting there's no registered speakers and no motion is necessary on this item for information only. And there are a couple takeaways for Jason, which we can follow up in writing on. I will move us to our second item on the agenda, which is the 2024 Office of the Auditor General Annual Report and 2025 Operational Plan. Before we begin this item, does anyone have a conflict of interest? Seeing and hearing none. This item does have a presentation.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh.
Just before we
have a point of
go into the
procedure.
next
Yep.
item,
I'll go to Councillor Montague first.
I just noticed that the last item, there is a recommendation to receive the report. So do we need a motion to receive to?
My understanding is we do not.
Okay.
So thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, that was also my my point of procedure because we have done that in the past. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the clerks have confirmed that no, we do not need a motion to receive. So continuing with item number 2, this does have a presentation, approximately 12 slides. I'd like to invite our Auditor General, Mike McDonnell, to introduce and present the item.
Thank you, Chair. I have the privilege today to present to you my office's 2024 annual report and 2025 operational plan. I think we have some slides that just going to get popped up in a moment. Excellent. We're on to slide 2 now, please. Thank you. The annual report was released at the end of January in conjunction with my 2025 audit plan. The Auditor General bylaw requires me to produce only an annual report, record of what my office has done in relation to objectives set for the year. A record of past achievements is fine on its own, but I think it's far more meaningful when it's related to what comes next. To achieve that, the annual report is also my office's 2025 operational plan. So you can see in one place how we've performed, where we're at now, and where we're headed going forward. 2024 represented the first full year of operations for the OAG and our first year receiving and assessing reports and conducting investigations under the whistleblower policy. Activities under the whistleblower policy are the subject of a separate whistleblower annual report, the first in the city's history, to my knowledge, which will be the next item on today's agenda. I issued 3 new audit reports in 2024 containing a total of 21 recommendations. And in June and December, I released the second and third follow-up reports on the status of previous audit recommendations, continuing a semi-annual process that began at the end of 2023. Next slide, please. 2024 was also the first year that my office was fully staffed. It's a rather impressive group. I have a bunch of them behind me, actually, with a combined total of over 100 years of audit experience. Every staff member has at least an undergraduate degree in fields ranging from commerce, criminology, psychology, history, politics, biology, and general arts. And all but one of the team has either a graduate degree or professional designation, some with both. Graduate degrees at both the master's and doctoral level include business, law, criminology, education, and child and youth care. And as for professional designations, we have 5 CPAs, chartered professional accountants, 3 certified information systems auditors, 2 certified fraud examiners, and 3 certified internal auditors. Like any leading organization, we monitor our performance through a framework outlining why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. Ours begins with a mandate drawn verbatim from the Auditor General bylaw to assist council in holding itself and city administrators accountable for the quality of stewardship over public funds and for the achievement of value for money in city operations. Our mission is to provide assurance that the City of Vancouver services are delivered with due care for economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. Our 4 goals, each with associated key performance indicators, describe how we fulfill our mandate and execute the mission. As the office has evolved and matured, so too is our performance framework. The first 2 goals are being updated to reflect that the office has transitioned from building to performing. Initially, my focus was on building performance audit capacity, followed by building our capacity to receive, process, and investigate reports under the whistleblower policy. Now that the building phase is done, the focus has shifted to performing at a high level. I expect that to be the focus to continue for the remainder of my term. Next slide, please. So goal 1, in June 2022, Council approved a motion from this committee to assign responsibility for the city's whistleblower function to the Auditor General. And subsequently, Council approved a revised whistleblower policy in October 2023. I assumed responsibility for the policy effective January 1st last year, and to support this function, 2 new staff were recruited. Procedures for whistleblower complaint intake, processing, investigation, and reporting are now in place. The whistleblower technology platform we inherited from the city is, in the words of Technology Services, at the end of its useful life. A new platform is currently being put into service as part of the office's audit platform. Because work under this goal is now essentially complete, it will be discontinued going forward. Last year's goal number 2, to produce high quality work, will going forward be our goal number 1. As planned, this year I released a total of 5 reports, 3 audit reports and 2 follow-up reports. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. KPI 2.2 speaks to external quality review by my practice regulator. CPA-BC's first practice inspection was conducted in March of 2023, and CPA-BC is the Chartered Professional Accountants for British Columbia. Our work met the practice review's requirements with no reportable deficiencies identified. Their next practice inspection is scheduled to take place in 2026. In the meantime, we will exchanging peer reviews with the Office of the Auditor General for Halifax Regional Municipality. They're an office roughly the same size as ours, with similar mandates and with similar audit standards. Following the same audit standards. We've just begun reviewing their files and expect them to complete a reciprocal review mid-year. The 3 reports released in 2024. In June, we released childcare, cultural, and social nonprofit leases. The audit examined whether the city effectively managed its portfolio of 119 below market and nominal leases with nonprofit organizations. The report contained 10 recommendations, all of which were accepted by the city and were endorsed by council. In October, we released the EPD Organizational Performance Management report. At the request of Vancouver Police Board, we undertook an examination of the effectiveness of the Vancouver Police Department's performance management processes. The report contained 4 recommendations, all of which were accepted by the Police Board and the department and were endorsed by council. And in December, we released a report on cybersecurity. The audit examined aspects of the city's cybersecurity posture. Due to the sensitive nature of the topic and the risk posed to the city by disclosure of potential vulnerabilities, the report was presented to council in camera as permitted under section 165.2 sub 1 sub D of the Vancouver Charter. We have a new goal too this year, reflecting the office's transition from building to performing, to conduct timely and effective investigations of complaints received under the city's whistleblower policy. The first KPI under this goal focuses on the timeliness of initial assessments of whistleblower reports. An initial assessment will be conducted of every report received under the whistleblower policy to determine if, on its face, the allegation could constitute serious wrongdoing as defined in the policy. The timely assessment of whistleblower reports is intended to build confidence in the process by providing complainants with assurance that the reports have been given appropriate consideration. After initial assessments are complete and where contact information has been provided, each complainant will be advised of the outcome. Our intention is to ensure that reporters feel they've been heard, that they feel respected, and that they understand our decision, even if it's not necessarily what they would have hoped for. Investigation of reports under the whistleblower process may lead to recommendations for corrective action, including the improvement of city processes and policies, but excluding employee discipline. Follow-up on the status of recommendations will be conducted annually and reported to Council. Goal 3 is to provide city departments with objective and helpful recommendations as evidenced by 3 things. 1, the proportion of recommendations accepted by audited departments. 2, the proportion of audit recommendations endorsed by this committee. And 3, proportion of recommendations implemented over 3 years. We aim to have all of our recommendations accepted by audited departments. In practice, this won't always happen. Differences of opinion can sometimes occur, but acceptance is what we work towards, and indeed, all 21 audit recommendations that we had last year were accepted by the city. We also aim to have all of our recommendations endorsed by this committee. This should be what happens, and in practice, it is what happened last year, with all 21 of our recommendations endorsed by this committee. KPI 3.3 is measured through the semi-annual follow-up process. In December last year, we reported having fully or substantially, the city reported having fully or substantially implemented 12 out of 33 recommendations, or 36% of the total. Last year, in our first follow-up issued in December, I reported on the status of 18 recommendations issued in our first 3 audit reports, and that 39% had been implemented. This doesn't mean that performance deteriorated. On the contrary, the city reported implementation of an additional 5 recommendations. However, the percentage went down because the denominator was larger, and now reporting on a larger pool of recommendations. The last goal is for our work to yield cost savings or enhanced revenues that at least match our operational costs over 5 years. We estimate that the implementation of our recommendations should result in financial benefits to the city of $16.9 million. Compared to the total cost of operating the OAG since inception of $5.2 million, we see a total ROI of 328%. Over 5 years, we estimate a total economic benefit to the city of $78 million for the work conducted so far. Details of this estimate can be found on page 11 of the annual report. Now, obviously, I'm quite pleased with this result. I must caution, though, that my goal is for the office to cover its costs, to break even rather than be a profit center. This is an appropriate goal for an audit office. Not all audits will have financial implications, and nor should they. The benefits from implementing audit recommendations often relate to improved governance, performance, and risk management. Neither don't have direct financial benefits or potential financial benefits that would be not credible to estimate. I'm aware of no other Auditor General at any level of government in Canada who voluntarily publishes estimated cost savings. I believe this is due in large part to the challenges and risks associated with auditors presenting this kind of information. Primarily among these challenges is the issue of attribution. It's the city that ultimately implements my audit recommendations, and it's difficult to directly attribute to my work costs that have been saved or avoided or revenues that have been enhanced. I take a very conservative approach in calculating the amounts and update them periodically in consultation with the city, but they remain nonetheless estimates that can't be independently verified. So while the information is interesting, its value is also limited and should be considered in the context of all the other performance information that's been provided to you. It should also be considered in the context of the other valuable recommendations provided in our reports over the last 2 years, aimed at improving the effectiveness and efficiency of building permit application process, compliance with the city's building bylaw, compliance with national and international trade agreements, the clarity of the city's procurement tendering documents, transparency financial reporting of permit reserves and levels of subsidization, compliance with requirements of the Vancouver Charter, the security of the city's technology assets, transparency of Park Board financial reporting, effectiveness of Park Board performance management and reporting, effectiveness of the communication between the Park Board and City Council, effectiveness of the Vancouver Police Board oversight of police department's performance and enterprise risk management, and improved public performance on part of the department and risk management. That's a long list, and I have a great many other things I could add to it, but I hope you get my point. All of these recommendations, if fully properly enacted by the city, will add value by improving the city's operations, although attributing a dollar value may not be actually possible. more credible. So that's it for my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation. And yes, you do have some questions. I'm going to advance Vice Chair Kirby-Young. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Mike, for the report. Just going to launch my question off your comment around the Auditor General's office has been up and running for a couple of years now. And so the goals are moving from setup and establishing the construct into completing audits, into what the savings are, recommendations, and then the implementation of the recommendations. I appreciate that. I wonder if you could delve a little bit further into your the comment around we're voluntarily publishing expected cost savings, and now we have a goal that's trying to stretch, if I can put it that way, stretch factor beyond that in terms of the implementation of those recommendations. So specifically, when I look at projected revenue savings over the coming years, I think that the bulk of that $78 million, about 65%, does come from the permit cost recovery model. Councillors are always told that we recover on permits, and then the audit revealed that we do not. And I understand that the work plan is to do that over time. So can you comment on what does the process look like in engaging with the departments in providing that information back, and how is that going to have some, I guess, defensibility around validating those savings?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Councillor Kirby-Young. The process is fairly straightforward to start with. We look at, we've made a recommendation. What's the potential outcome? If things were done immediately, what potential financial impact might there be? Is that credible? Is it measurable? And then over time, we temper that with, what's the city actually done? So if the city has, moved more quickly than perhaps we were anticipating to implement a recommendation, then that might suggest that there's more of a financial impact in the near term than in the longer term. On the other hand, if it takes longer, then the numbers get pushed out. It's a process of ongoing dialogue with the affected departments, really as a reality check, not to necessarily validate. There are numbers, and not the city's numbers. They shouldn't be held to account for them. This is my attempt at trying to quantify what the impact of the office's work has been in financial terms. As I did say in the presentation, it's not commonly done. The only other place that does it that I'm aware of is Toronto, and they're required to do it under their enabling legislation for the Auditor General of the City of Toronto. I'm doing this voluntarily because I believe it was something that you were interested in. I believe it's valuable information to a point, and it's worth keeping our eye on. I'm just as accountable for having a positive impact on the city as anybody else. But I do caution that the value is not just the numbers.
I appreciate that, absolutely. Can I pause there and switch to questions just for time? And then my next one is really just on the whistleblower function. And if I recall, it was a suggestion coming from you and a recommendation made by the committee that the whistleblower function be extricated, if I can put it that way, from within the internal city bureaucracy and placed in the Auditor General office as a kind of at arm's length, right? And provide that external defensibility, more comfort for people to respond, and more external credibility to the public. Can you just provide some context to us on if that is a common model with other Auditor General offices across the country and what that looks like?
Yeah, thank you for that question. In 2022, I released a study called the Whistleblower Study. It's on my webpage at the request of this committee. And what it showed was how Vancouver was actually quite an outlier with respect to where the whistleblower function resided. Any other city that had an Auditor General or equivalent, a city auditor, had the function reside within that office, not within city management. So Vancouver was outlier, if you will, in that. So I made a recommendation to the committee to consider whether this was in fact the right place for it. And you came back with a further recommendation that it should be moved to my office. I took that as a friendly amendment to my recommendation. In short, it was, I think, absolutely the right decision. The information that we receive through the whistleblower process is valuable in informing our audit program. But I think more importantly, for whistleblowers, it gives them confidence that any complaint that they make under the whistleblower policy, any report that we receive will be treated seriously, that whistleblowers will be treated with respect, and that any report that we receive will be looked into, will be investigated. And I think that independence is really a strong motivator for bringing people forward who might otherwise be reluctant. It takes a lot of courage to be a whistleblower, especially if you're a city employee. And
Thank you.
I think it's
I
important
can,
to acknowledge that.
yeah,
We're at
I
our
agree with you.
time, Counselor.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can you certainly move a second round, or someone else can if you have further questions. Thanks for that response. I'm going to advance Counselor Clausen.
Thanks very much, Chair. Noting that the 2025 work plan is set, this is more of a hypothetical scenario that I want you to comment on. This week, the special council meeting dealt with the idea of exploring improving the amount of procured services from Canadians, services and products. Is there a scenario where the Office of the Auditor General could play a role in advancing this work? And again, hypothetical.
We could validate numbers. Thank you for that question, Councillor Clausen. We could validate numbers that the city put forward, speaking to what the proportion of purchases were from local versus foreign. In terms of my own office, I'm unaware of us procuring anything that isn't from a Canadian source at this time. Other than perhaps the audit software that is currently being implemented, I do believe that that does have U.S. roots. But other than that, pretty much everything else is procured locally.
I raise this just because it's a live conversation and it addresses the kind of work that your office does. The report states that we're discussing right now states that 36% of 2023 audit recommendations have been fully implemented. Do you perceive that there are any barriers that need to be overcome to achieve full implementation of your recommendations?
I think it's just time as much as anything else. Some of the recommendations that we've made, particularly in relation to the park board and how they manage revenues, will take time. There's a lot of work that's needed, a lot of systems that need to be put in place, a lot of business practices that were absent that need to be built, and that's not going to happen overnight. That's why I think it's important that we have regular periodic updates to the committee from the departments on their progress, and that's what we've been doing so far.
Thanks very much. The report mentions an upcoming peer review by the Halifax Auditor General. And so what specific areas is the Office of the Auditor General asking to be reviewed?
Well, we take a sample of audit files from each office, and our intention is to ensure, from our perspective, that they're complying with Canadian audit standards, which we both follow, and whether there's any opportunities for improvement. I think we'd also be looking potentially at opportunities for improvement in relation to efficiency of the process. And actually, I have my Deputy Auditor General, Laurie Barrett, with me, and she's leading that work. Laurie, have anything further to add to that?
Thank you, Mike. So those will definitely be areas that we'll be looking at. And so we will be reviewing files from their office, and they will be then reciprocating and reviewing ours, and ensuring that that what we've set up to do within our processes and internal policies have been carried out through the files that they're reviewing, and again, looking for continual improvement processes on both ends to make our work better.
Thanks very much. So I think probably the last question of the time I have here. Just at this stage of the office, how do you perceive the work, your work, the office's work has improved public accountability and decision-making within council and city departments to date?
Well, I think some of the work that we've done around, say, compliance with the Vancouver Charter, compliance with national and international trade agreements, is avoiding potential issues down the road that perhaps the city wasn't aware of. And so from that perspective, real value add. I'm really pleased where we're at this point in the growth of the city. And I think back to almost 3.5 years ago when I walked into an empty office all by myself, and where we are now by comparison, it's really quite gratifying to see the difference.
Okay, thanks very much. Those are my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clausen. I'll advance Carol Bellringer for questions. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks so much. And I'm going to just ask it in two parts because it's easier that way. Can you remind me when this committee will see the next audit plan?
My audit plan doesn't come to the committee. It's released publicly. I have to do it by a certain date, but I'm not required and I don't seek council's approval for my
Okay,
audit
fine.
plan.
And so
Part of
there's
the
no,
independence.
so any discussion on it then is really today? Well, not
Discussion
really.
on it
I don't
is-
even know what
D-
I'm picking the wrong words. Okay, let me just back up from that. Okay, appreciating it doesn't come here. And totally understanding the independence of the office and the importance of you select the audits and you've based it on meeting with people and looking at a whole bunch of things. Tying that back to the goal around the savings, I'll just offer it as a message of encouragement, perhaps, to, find an audit within that audit plan that can specifically look at the savings, as opposed to trying to find it in it is very difficult, and I totally agree with what you've described around the difficulties of pulling out how much an audit may have saved. But there may be some benefit to, there are so many, construction work and contracting and things that are much easier to relate back to savings, if they were to be selected. So not trying to direct you to do so, but, encouraging you to take a look at that.
Thank you. And it is something that is actively considered when we put the plan together. And you'll see that, what we've actually delivered historically doesn't exactly match the plan, because the plan shifts and evolves as time goes forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for that feedback. Seeing no further councillors or members on the queue, and we have no speakers to this item, I would like someone to move the recommendation. Moved, Councillor Claassen. Seconded, Councillor Montague. Any discussion, committee members? See, Councillor Claassen, go ahead.
Very briefly, and it's just to follow up on what we just heard from Carol Bellringer. I think that it was just the acknowledgement that moving forward into the 2025 work plan, that there is at least an attempt at focusing some of the cost savings piece on around one of those. I just thought it was a worthwhile recommendation. Again, it's only just to set a framework for the work that you are doing here and the good work of your team and your office. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Claassen, for those comments. Advancing Vice Chair Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just want to thank the Auditor General and the full team who are in place now for all of the work, having been on this journey from the original Auditor General hiring committee to the first committee once the new AG Mike was in place. It has been a pretty rapid trajectory in terms of staffing up and getting audits underway very quickly in the first year. And I also really appreciate the willingness to expand the function to include the whistleblower component and the speed with which that was not only set up. I believe that the staff person did not come on until the second quarter, if I'm correct, of last year, and yet you went through a pretty substantive number of complaints and produced a very fulsome report. It's also encouraging to see the trajectory of the goals as they are increasing in sophistication beyond completion of audits to the financial or qualitative impact of those and the actual implementation of the recommendations. So at about sort of, a few years into this, I think there's been a lot of progress. I think it provides not only council with an external independent perspective on a number of matters that come before us in the responsible expenditure of resources, but it also provides the public with confidence that we do have this function. And having been on a council that didn't have it and that has it now, I think it's been an incredibly positive addition to our governance landscape and the oversight piece, so I'm grateful for that. I do have one procedural question, Chair, on this report, and that was just if whether or not this one is for information, because I don't see a specific versus approval. I know that we don't have decision-making authority of the committee, and we just received the past one for information without a motion, and yet we're making a motion on this one. So can I just get procedural clarity on that, please?
Yes, certainly. I'll ask the clerks to speak to it, and then I will address that in more detail.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I believe the first one, which was received.
Can we stop my time?
Sorry, Councillor Kirby-Young?
Yeah, can we stop my time,
Yeah, we can
please?
stop your timer.
We have, the first item was received for information specifically, which per section, I believe 5.16 of the procedure bylaw does not require a vote. This item is being received, not for information, it's being received, which is a subtle difference. That's my understanding. The Auditor General may have more to add to that, but I'm not sure.
When it comes to issues of procedure in this chamber, I'm very much reliant on the expert advice of the clerks. Thank you very much.
Does that address your question, Vice Chair Kirby-Young?
Yes, that's a very interesting nuance. Thank you.
Yes, we're learning on the fly. And I appreciate your comments. I'll just advance myself on the queue just and very briefly, in the interest of time, is to echo the comments of Vice Chair Kirby-Young and Carol in terms of the work of the Auditor General's office. It's actually moved quite quickly from inception to where we are today. And I really appreciate noting you've got your work plan in place, but the comments by Carol in terms of looking at audits that are both quantitative and qualitative in nature, which I know is part of your role. And I know you also have been very clear that you take the opportunity to meet with committee members annually, as well as all members of council as well. But simply to reiterate and echo the comments of my colleagues, it's a very thoughtfully prepared report, and happy to see the office up and running because it does strengthen our governance framework, I think, here in the city, and does strengthen that trust and confidence in City Hall and in the City of Vancouver. So thank you. With that, I will call the vote. Councillors, if you can vote online, and to the clerks, I'll take a vote. Assist in favor, please.
Vote assist in favor for me too, please.
Clerks, it looks like we have all the votes in. And this item passes unanimously. Thank you to the committee. And that concludes item 2. We are moving to our third and final item on the agenda, which is the 2024 Annual Whistleblower Report. Before we begin, I'll check and see if there's any conflicts of interest from committee members. Seeing, hearing none. This item does have a presentation, approximately 22 slides. I'll now invite our Auditor General again to introduce and present this item, along with Hamish Flanagan, Audit Principal, and Varun Banthia, Senior Auditor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. We'll just get the slides out. Great. Thank you very much. My comments on this will be rather brief. You'll be hearing more from Hamish. This is our first whistleblower report, reflecting our first year being responsible for administering the policy. First whistleblower report, I believe, in the city's history. I firmly believe that council made a very positive and correct decision in moving responsibility to the independent office of the Auditor General from city administration. Not to disparage city administration at all, more that an independent office is the right place for this kind of function. This being the first report back to you, the first time we're having this conversation in this chamber, I really do welcome your feedback. This report is for you. And if there's something in here that you're not getting, or if there's too much of something you're not interested in, please let me know. That's the whole purpose of having this conversation and this presentation. So having said that, I'll turn things over to Hamish Flanagan. I spoke to the committee this time last year saying that we were in the process of hiring somebody really cool. And here he is. Hamish is both a lawyer and a trained mediator. He's highly experienced in a variety of areas, including performance audit, having been with the Office of the Auditor General of British Columbia once upon a time, and where we recruited him from, the Office of the Auditor General Controller of New Zealand. So we're delighted to have Hamish as part of the team, and he's going to walk you through the report. Thank you. Hamish?
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. To start, I just give you a quick refresher on what the whistleblower program actually is, if we can go to the next slide. So serious wrongdoing is the central concept to the whistleblower program. That term is further defined in the policy and is mostly financially focused. So the whistleblower program is not a broad ombuds type scheme for investigating all grievances or issues. And it's just one tool in a suite of initiatives necessary to demonstrate integrity and the commitment to honesty and integrity in the city. Others, like the culture and the tone from the top, other city policies, particularly the code of conduct, are also important to that end. And it's the whistleblower policy that determines the scope of the whistleblower program. We have a whistleblower process manual that was updated by the OAG in 2024 that provides further detail on how to implement the policy and the roles of stakeholders. We'll go to the next slide, thanks. So again, some context useful. Council revised and expanded the whistleblower policy in 2023, and as we've already heard, assigned the Auditor General responsibility for it from January 1st, 2024. And that, as we've already heard, brought Vancouver into line with other large Canadian municipalities, such as Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, Ottawa, and others. At the same time as Council assigned the function to the OAG, it expanded the scope of the policy to allow members of the public to report, which was also consistent with whistleblower functions in other locations. A summary of the reporting methods most commonly used to report in 2024 is shown on this slide, which comes from Part 4 of the Whistleblower Report. And as you would expect, mirroring many services, online methods dominate. We do maintain a phone line, which has a minimal cost. And the small slice of the pie you see for referrals represents reports received from managers directly sending them to the OAG, which fulfills their obligations under the policy, which we'll talk more about shortly. Next slide, thank you. So, the whistleblower policy doesn't duplicate, and it's quite clear and explicit in the policy that it doesn't duplicate these other things that I've listed up there. City policies, dispute resolution mechanisms, and collective or other employment agreements. So this is the first annual whistleblower report under the new policy. And right at the start of the report, at page 3, we included a summary of what went well and what was a challenge for the whistleblower program in 2024. Next slide, thanks. One final important piece of context is that in addition to the accountability through our annual whistleblower report, we also report on KPIs for the whistleblower program in the OAG annual report, which you've obviously just had spoken to. So just very briefly then, so the KPIs for 2024 were about establishing the function, staffing, which was achieved in April 2024, and establishing systems and processes, which, as the Auditor General mentioned earlier, will further improve with the implementation of new whistleblower software in this year. And our 2025 focus changes from establishment to impact for the city with a new KPI that will track timeliness of completing our initial assessments, and also a second KPI which will track the implementation of recommendations that come from the whistleblower program, which we'll speak to later. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So to 2024 and some key numbers. You'll see there that we had significant volumes, 191 allegations contained in 173 reports. An allegation, obviously, so a report can have more than one allegation, which is why the numbers differ. Importantly, we resolved 163 of these in the calendar year. And for those who struggle with math, that leaves 10, and those remaining 10 are all under active consideration, either an assessment or an investigation, with some being received right near the year end, so hence why they are still in process. The chart on this slide here shows where reports originated from in 2024. So you'll see that Council's decision to allow public reports has been enthusiastically received, being a significant source of reports. I note also that almost 21% of reports were anonymous. And we noted several instances of city employees making anonymous reports. So the reports were anonymous, but the content made clear that the reporters were employees. And we suspect that this may indicate that fear of retaliation that comes with being a whistleblower, even with the protections that the policy offers to employees. The final point on that slide is that we have 17 recommendations that we made from completed investigations in 2024, and it's those that we will be tracking by that second new KPI I mentioned. Next slide, thank you. So this chart from page 11 of the report shows our attempt to group reports by some sort of theme, and obviously is an imprecise, but is our best attempts. The high proportion of external reports in 2024 influenced these numbers. External reports were more likely to raise issues outside of the scope of the whistleblower policy. However, there are still a good number of reports raising issues within the scope of the policy, as you'll see in that slide. Next slide, thank you. This chart shows the actions that were taken in response to the reports we received in 2024, and sometimes multiple actions resulted from one report. So a few comments about each of these categories. This first highlighted bar in this chart, in this slide, is about the direct close. So that means the report did not proceed in the whistleblower program beyond the initial assessment phase, but it doesn't mean no action was taken. This category includes reports that fell outside the scope of the policy, where a complainant was directed to the appropriate forum for the issues raised. A common example of this would be reports about parking infractions, for which there is already an established forum for disputes. Even where reports raise issues outside of the city's jurisdiction, we advise the complainant where to direct their report, for example, the BC Ombudsperson, before we close the file. The whistleblower policy provides the OEG with the discretion to tell a complainant where to raise their issue or to forward the complaint directly to an appropriate department. When we decide which path to take, the OAG considers what will best assist the complainant and any privacy issues, particularly the need for consent when disclosing complainant's personal information. Some in the direct close category include anonymous reports where the information provided was just too vague or reports lacked merit to allow for any action, although this was surprisingly rare. Usually there is an issue in the report that's worth looking at somewhere. And we track all reports. We report to the city manager for investigation under the whistleblower policy, to refer the report to another forum, or a decision that no further action is required. Next slide. As mentioned, some reports we receive may have merit, but not under the whistleblower policy, and are best addressed by another part of the city. Examples include reports raising issues under the Code of Conduct or Respect in the Workplace policy, which are managed by Human Resources, or matters best addressed by bylaw enforcement. And where we refer a report to a city department, it's with the consent of the complainant. In some cases, consent is only provided to share the complaint anonymously. So we continue to track the outcomes of reports referred to city departments, and that allows us to report to you on the outcomes or progress of even those referred reports. So the next slide gives you those outcomes. As you'll see, 6 reports were substantiated by the recipient city department with action taken in response, and there's 3 that still have an investigation or assessment in progress. And I should note, we don't audit departments' conclusion on these referred reports because by definition, they're outside the scope of the whistleblower policy. Next slide. An investigation is obviously the most resource-intensive response to a report. And given the extent of work involved and natural justice processes required of an investigation, we had 5 investigations that we commenced in 2024 that weren't yet concluded by year end, and so we cannot report about that work yet. Next slide. This chart from page 15 of the report shows the status or outcomes for those 31 reports that the OAG determined warranted a preliminary assessment or investigation in 2024. So it shows 7 reports were substantially or partially substantiated in 2024. These are reports assessed to be within the scope of the policy, Substantiated reports would be those where the OEG's found evidence of serious wrongdoing as defined in the policy. Partially substantiated those where issues of substance have been identified, but it would be an overstatement to characterise them as serious wrongdoing. Next slide, thanks. The whistleblower policy also allows the Auditor General to delegate responsibility to investigate a whistleblower report to the City Manager, which in practice is carried out by the Chief Human Resources Officer and his team, with the Auditor General required by the policy to maintain oversight of the investigation, including procedural fairness. So the Auditor General exercised this referral power for 2 reports this year, alleging time theft by City employees. The Auditor General considered the expertise of human resources would be useful in investigating these reports, and they had significant overlap with issues of employee discipline, which is the domain of human resources. Next slide. One report was closed because we determined that the issues raised would be better addressed in a performance audit, and that's the audit of city land sales. This audit is in progress and scheduled for completion mid-2025. Next slide. Recognising that we are a demand-driven function, and that's actually a strength of the program that we are directly connected to the public. Nonetheless, a significant proportion of the reports that we received were ultimately best directed to other forums in 2024. So we've planned some initiatives in 2025 to try and shape the type of reports we receive, which is part of the natural maturation of the whistleblower program within the city. So we expect some clearer public-facing messaging about the scope of the whistleblower function may reduce the number of reports we receive that are better directed to other forums. New software that we've mentioned that we'll be implementing this year will enable an updated public-facing whistleblower web form and web page in 2025. Second, we would expect more internal reports. We know from interactions with city employees that we need to raise awareness in the city about the whistleblower policy, and in particular, every manager's obligation to promptly and confidentially forward to the OAG all reports of serious wrongdoing received from employees. So in 2025, we'll be using various internal channels within the city to get word out about the function and about managers' duty to report. Next slide. So returning to 2024, because the whistleblower program was significantly revamped in 2024, we wanted to provide you with some more detail on some of the reports we received and what we did with them. So part 5 of our whistleblower annual report highlights 8 reports we received and the resulting action that we took under the policy. 3 report responses I want to highlight today because they contain recommendations that we are inviting the committee to endorse, as we do for recommendations from our performance audits. 2 are related, as they both deal with personal use of city-owned vehicles, which are summarised in case study 5.2, pages 18 to 21 of the report. So the first investigation involved an anonymous report of misuse of a city vehicle, allegations that the use was outside of policy and included personal use of a city vehicle. Our investigation determined that the City Department followed the process required to obtain the vehicle, but we found that the required process itself did not cover the necessary steps to comply with city policies and tax obligations related to operating the city vehicle. So due to a lack of knowledge of fleet management policies, the department did not meet all of its obligations related to the vehicle's operation, including not complying with city policies. Instead of being parked in a designated city parking spot at the end of each shift with management's consent, the vehicle operator was permitted to drive to and keep the vehicle at their residence, a significant distance outside of the city. This gave rise to personal benefit. That personal benefit was not recorded or reported by the city to the CRA. In this instance, the lack of knowledge in the department also resulted in significantly delayed driver registration with driver services and completion of mandatory driver training. The second investigation came from a member of the public complaining about a city vehicle being regularly parked near their home and some related allegations about employee behaviour. The OAG found that employees were driving a city vehicle to and parking it near their homes overnight on weekdays. Management had granted permission for this practice. The imprecise and in some parts contradictory nature of some of the relevant city policies meant that it wasn't possible to say that the practice was inconsistent with city policies regarding vehicle use. And to illustrate that, the safe driving policy refers in passing to taking vehicles home at the end of a shift, but without any guidance on when that's permitted. But meanwhile, the parking city-owned marked vehicles policy requires that vehicles be parked in a designated park at the end of a shift, with no exceptions provided for. We determined the employees were unlikely to be incurring taxable benefits through their practices, but there was some risk that the CRA could see matters differently. Next slide, thanks. So, we made 14 recommendations, and those recommendations overlap because they're directed to the same sorts of issues around operation of city vehicles, but to different city departments. And those recommendations are on the slide that you have in front of you. So, a need to address the specific unaccounted for taxable benefits that we identified, a need for a citywide review of unaccounted for personal use of city vehicles and the resulting unreported taxable benefits, improved tracking and reporting of personal use of city vehicles, reconciliation of the city policies that I mentioned before that are contradictory, need for a city department to take the lead on developing comprehensive guidance for the city on vehicle acquisition and use. And then finally, considering whether job description updates where vehicle use occurs are required. And I note that already this year we've received another report from a member of the public of personal use of a city vehicle that we are gathering information on. The third and final report, thank you, next slide, I will summarise, involved reports of a conflict of interest relating to a political staffer, and that's case study 5.1 in the report. Now, very importantly, we found that the report of conflict of interest did not meet the definition of serious wrongdoing, that the matter was more appropriately considered under the Code of Conduct. So there was no finding by the Auditor General of any wrongdoing. However, in the course of looking at the fact that the issue would be better addressed to the Code of Conduct, we noted that there was some challenges within the current code as it was written with its ability to address reports. And we summarised those issues in 3 observations. So the first was that while the code states that it applies to city employees who are political staff, it was silent on how the code should be applied to them. And we observed that unlike provincial and in federal jurisdictions, the city does not have specific standards of conduct for political staff that reflect their unique roles. And then thirdly, that political staff, because they don't report through the city's operational hierarchy and don't have an accountability relationship ultimately leading to the city manager, it was difficult to see practically how the code could be applied as written. As a result, we were invited by the Chief Human Resource Officer to provide recommendations on code changes to address those challenges. The objective being to provide clarity for stakeholders, for potentially affected staff, for city staff administering or trying to administer the code, as well as for any future complainants. And those recommendations are on the next slide. So those were that the city consider amending the Code of Conduct to define the term political staff, amending the code to accommodate political appointees' unique responsibilities, or else create a separate credible code for political appointees. And thirdly, to assign responsibility for monitoring and enforcement of the code for political staff external to the city's operational hierarchy. That concludes my report on our whistleblower report, and I'll hand back to the Auditor General for his recommendations to the committee.
Thank you, Hamish. Committee has 2 recommendations in front of it. To receive the whistleblower report, and further, we're asking you to endorse the 17 recommendations that are spelled out in the report. With that, that concludes our presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for those presentations. And yes, we do have some questions. We'll start with Carol Bellringer. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations. It's an impressive amount of work in short order, so well done. I like the amount of detail provided, and it's well written. I like the way things are followed up. I think the process itself is solid. I have 2 complaints. 2 complaints. I don't have 2 complaints. I have 2 questions. One involves a question around the complainants. So I have 2 questions around the process and just one in the report. After the initial assessment, do you have further correspondence with the complainants?
Do you want me to answer that? Yeah. Yeah, we always go back to a complainant after an initial assessment. Yeah, so we always make sure that we respond to them so that they know what's happened with their complaint.
And sorry, after that step, so later on in the process, would you be going back to a?
Oh, yes, we give them periodic updates on, so yeah, like if a preliminary assessment's taking some time, then we would give them an update. And the whistleblower software that we'll be getting will help us actually to automate that somewhat, so we'll be able to give kind of regular scheduled updates. Currently, we just kind of have to do it, when we consider, sufficient time's passed, yeah.
If I could just chime in quickly on that, that's in line with our 3 objectives through this communication. It's one, that complainants or reporters feel respected, they feel heard, and that they understand our decision. Whether they like it or not is another issue. It might not be what they hope for, but they'll understand what we decided and why we decided it.
Thanks. Just a bit of a contrast with performance audits. I noticed in the recommendations, there's no comments back from whoever it would relate to. Is that something we'll see perhaps in updates, or how will we know the degree to which they've been accepted?
So thanks for that question, Carol. This is a different process than performance audits. So we get to the end and we provide the home department where the investigation lay with these recommendations, and they have an opportunity to get back to us as to whether they make sense or not. In all cases, the departments will come back and say, thanks, yeah, these make sense, and leave it with us. The follow-up process is going to be separate from the performance audit follow-up process. The intention is that when we put out our second report this time next year, that we'll have an update on the status of recommendations. And it'll be a similar sort of thing. We'll be checking in with the departments rather than re-auditing or reinvestigating, in this case, the work, and providing you with an update on where it's at. And that's one of our performance measures. Because these are, I would say, easier than many of our performance audit recommendations, I would expect that we'll have a higher turnover rate every year in terms of actual implementation than our performance audits. But this is new, and I may be proven wrong on that.
Sorry, thank you. The questions on page 14, there's a reference to not having received an update from one department despite several requests. Is there anything we can do to help nudge that along?
Perhaps a request from this committee for the response to the Auditor General would be warmly received.
Does that address your question? So that could be, I presume, moved as a motion later. Thank you for the questions, Carol. I'm going to advance Vice Chair Kirby-Young for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thanks for the report. My first question, I guess, is around respecting individual employee privacy concerns, but with respects to the vehicles usage and those complaints that you outlined, are you able to kind of give us some color as to what type of departments this is? Is it internal or external departments? Is it external facing, something like streets and engineering? Is it more internal? Are you able to give us any sort of broader perspective on that?
Yes, there were 2 different departments. One was ACCS and, sorry.
Actually, they're both ACCS,
They're both
but just
ACCS.
different units, yeah.
Sorry, you said ACCS and?
They were both with ACCS.
They were both in ACCS.
Different divisions
Okay.
within the department. though.
Arts, culture, and community services. Okay. Thank you. My next question is sort of looking at the overall number of complaints, 171 odd, and how many were sort of investigated and moved forward. I think, I was doing some quick math, sort of 5 to 10% range or in terms of that. Obviously, it's encouraging to see the public utilizing the office. I'm wondering if a lot of those complaints were redirected to other areas. Is there an education opportunity, and is that being pursued in terms of the type of information that's provided on the website of the channels in terms of which type of requests to direct where? Just thinking about efficient use of resources, like welcoming the complaints, but also giving people the right information to send the right complaint to the right place.
You're absolutely correct. And in fact, that is our plan. We are implementing new software to support the whistleblower function in conjunction with software that's supporting our audit work as well. And part of that will be revamping the intake form that is publicly facing right now. Essentially, we picked up on the one that was already in existence and for city employees and turned it outwards. And so, yeah, we have some work to do there in terms of helping direct members of the public to the appropriate place for a complaint that, say, is about things that we commonly received, such as parking tickets or development issues with buildings and those sorts of things.
And I was just going to supplement that answer with, we're also developing some FAQs as well, because as we've learned over 2024, then, we get a flavour for what's coming in. We can kind of preemptively answer those questions about exactly those sorts of issues that Mike has, the Auditor General has mentioned.
Excellent, thank you. And then my third question is just with respect to the complaint about the political staffer, in terms of the status of that, am I correct that does that now rest with HR to bring forward, to look at the 3 potential avenues to better define staff within the code of conduct and bring that forward? Or what is the status of what that process will look like?
Yeah, these are recommendations that were made at the invitation of the Chief Human Resources Officer. And so, yes, they reside there now.
Okay, so council should expect to see something coming forward through that channel. Is that correct?
Andrew?
Andrew Niklicki, Chief Human Resources Officer. We're currently working on the update to the Code of Conduct, which we will be bringing back to council once we've completed our review.
Okay, thank you. I will leave it there. Appreciate the answers.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Montague, go ahead.
Excuse me. Yeah, thanks, Chair. One of the things we're being asked to do today is approve the recommendations. There's 17 of them in the report.
Endorse.
Endorse them. And I'm noting that 3 of them revolve around the Code of Conduct, which is handled by the Integrity Commissioner. There's currently a scope review going on with that, and I'm wondering how you see the endorsement by this committee, how it would conflict or interact, or how that would be dealt with as that scope review is coming to council.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Montague. We're talking about 2 different codes of conduct. There's the Code of Conduct in relation to city employees, which is what this relates to. And then there's the Code of Conduct related to elected officials, which is the purview of the Integrity Commissioner. So they're distinct.
Okay, and it would, so you're specifically referring to a Code of Conduct for, like you mentioned, particular positions here. You're referring that to the Code of Conduct, not for...
The current Code of Conduct, as it's written, states right up front that it also applies to city employees, including political staff.
Okay. I think that answers my question. Thanks, appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that clarification. Councillor Claassen.
Just in general, how can City Council best support the whistleblower program moving forward?
Well, not to be cheeky, but endorse my recommendations, please, would be, I think, a great start. Other than that, I think there's some work to be done in terms of awareness, both in the public domain and within city employees. So, any support you can provide in terms of just letting people know that it's there. City managers, so they appreciate their responsibilities to forward allegations of serious wrongdoing, reports of serious wrongdoing to my office. would be greatly appreciated.
And just sort of looking into the future, what does success look like to you in terms of this, the whistleblower program in the next few years?
Well, success looks like perhaps not having quite so many reports that are clearly not in our domain. So part of that awareness. Success also, I think, looks like having a more balanced proportion of internal versus external reports. You look at cities like Toronto or Ottawa or Edmonton, who have public-facing whistleblower functions with readily available data. Roughly, the proportion of internal versus external reports is roughly 50-50. It varies from year to year, but more or less it's half and half. We're quite biased towards external reporters right now, and not so much from the employee group. So success would probably look like being more in line with other cities, unless there's a valid reason for it not being the case. I don't know of one at this point.
You. One more question here. With regards to the departments that have failed to act on recommendations, how do you intend to report that? Would that be public?
It will be part of this report for next year, yes.
Well, I just want to echo the comments have been made that the swiftness and the ability to get this program up and running and create something substantive in a short period of time has been
Thank you.
Appreciated, and I just want to thank you and your team for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the questions. And I'll just advance myself for a couple of questions. Just to the Auditor General, obviously you're hearing some positive feedback around the first formal whistleblower report, but can you just comment on, in terms of the whistleblower function today that we have in the City of Vancouver, how it compares to other jurisdictions? Can you just comment on that broadly?
Sure. The whistleblower study from 2022 outlined, 3 significant areas that were different, and that were Vancouver was really an outlier. Some areas that were the same, but then there were some things that were quite distinctly different. First being, I mentioned earlier, the fact that the whistleblower function was managed by management, overseen by management, not by an independent group. So that's been addressed. This is good. The whistleblower policy was geared towards entirely towards employee reporting. Did not have an avenue for reports from members of the public. That's been addressed. It's now there. And thirdly, each of the jurisdictions had public reporting on whistleblowing activities. Vancouver did not, and now it does with this report. So that's been addressed. So I think what this has done now is brought Vancouver in line with good practice from other local governments across the country, and I think it's a real positive step.
Great, thank you. And then I just have 2 more questions. One I'll direct to our city manager, and it's just to the point that was raised by Carol Bellringer about a department that hadn't responded. Is that something that you can take away as a follow-up? I don't feel a motion is necessary from the committee, but is that something that can be taken offline as a follow-up action?
Thanks for the question, Chair. Yeah, at this point, I have no information about that. I think there's an opportunity for improvement here. Certainly would not take a motion from this committee. I think if there's information outstanding, I'm happy to understand where that is and to follow up. Thanks.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And then my last question is to our Chief Human Resources Officer. Just with respect to the Employee Code of Conduct update and review, including the considerations around political staff, when can we anticipate seeing that back here for approval as a council? Just I'm curious about the time frame.
It is currently scheduled to come to council, I believe, in May. That may come forward sooner, but that's where it's currently scheduled.
Okay, I appreciate that because I think having that clarity will help going forward. I'm going to, that's all I had for questions. I'll advance our Vice Chair, Kirby Young. Do you have further questions?
Thanks. I have a follow-up procedural question again, and just in terms of buttoning down this committee, because it seems a bit different than our past meetings. We have these reports, but they actually don't contain any recommendations, and I'm hearing from the Auditor General he's asking for a motion to endorse. So I have 2 requests, Chair, and one is if we can get more clarity on future agendas, what the action is of the committee, and have that included on the agendas. And if we are being asked to endorse, if we can have that language on the screen so it can be moved appropriately. I'm happy to move it. I would just really like to be clear on what it is that we are, if we're endorsing and versus receiving, and so we just haven't had the clarity on this agenda, and I'm looking for that in terms of the language we're being asked to support. But I'm happy to move a general endorsement of the recommendations.
Certainly, and just before you do that, I'm just going to have the clerks address your question and comment, and I appreciate that. I think that would be helpful for future meetings. Go ahead, clerks.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kirby-Young. Yes, we can look at providing greater clarity in future meetings. And for the motion right now, we have brought it up on the screen, so you're able to see it.
Okay, happy to move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. And can I get a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Clausen. Any discussion, further discussion? I'm seeing no one on the queue. And so with that, I'll simply take us to a vote. You could vote online, please. And I'll take a vote and insist in favor, please. I think we have all of our votes in. Yep, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much to committee members. Thank you to our Auditor General and your team for the comprehensive work on this first whistleblower report. Very helpful and informative. I think that brings us to the end of our meeting, and so I'll simply call for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Montague. Seconder? Councillor Clausen? And all in favor? Let's do a show of hands. Thank you. And that carries. Thanks, everyone. That concludes our meeting. And thank you again to all of the staff support and to all the committee members. And thank you for the really great questions that we've had raised today. Thank you.